Welcome to the Fighting for Democracy in the Workplace, the New Labor Movement panel. My name is Stephanie Luce, and I'm a professor of labor studies at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies, as well as a professor of sociology here at the Grad Center. Tonight's event is part of the Graduate Center's Promise and Perils of Democracy project, which is funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York. This event is sponsored by the Office of Public Programs and co-sponsored by the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies as a kickoff event to a day-long conference taking place tomorrow at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies on 43rd Street. And that's called How Workers Win, Rebuilding Labor's Power. So this is an exciting opening panel to that conference, and it's an excellent panel that we have for you tonight. We're going to hear from our speakers until about 7:30, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience, and we'll ask you to come to the microphones at that time. And now let me introduce our panel. Keith Bullard is an organizer for the Union of Southern Service Workers. Keith joined the Fight for 15 about a decade ago or so when he worked for McDonald's in Detroit, Michigan. He eventually moved to North Carolina, where he became an organizer and is organizing with the union there today. Mark Meinster is Director of Organization for the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, the UE, a union known for its focus on international worker solidarity and its commitment to aggressive, militant, and member-run trade unionism. Sarah Nelson is International President of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, as Communication Workers of America, AFL-CIO, where she has served since 2014. They represent 50,000 of aviation's first responders at 19 airlines. Sarah has been a union flight attendant since 1996 when she started flying at United Airlines. The New York Times called her America's most powerful flight attendant for her role in helping end the government shutdown. And InStyle magazine placed her on their list of top 50 badass women, and Fast Company put her on the cover of their summer 2020 magazine with the headline, Workers Strike Back. Antonio Rosario began working for UPS several decades ago and got involved in his union, Teamsters Local 804. He began working first as a volunteer organizer and moving up in the organization, now working full-time as Teamster lead organizer for the Amazon division in the Northeast. And finally, our panel tonight will be moderated by Sarah Hughes. Sarah Hughes is a proud alumni and former coordinator of the union semester program at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. Former student, I have to say. Currently, she works as an organizer, trainer, and writer at Labor Notes, a media and organizing project that supports rank-and-file organizing. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening. Thank you, Stephanie. I owe being up here along with many other things to Stephanie and, and the former Murphy Institute, now SLU, School of Labor and Urban Studies. I'm so excited to be up here, and excited to be up here in my role as someone who works at Labor Notes. We love talking about democracy in the workplace at Labor Notes, and so this is an exciting panel for me. I will actually just jump right into our questions, and first I would love to start with, I went back to an article you actually wrote for us at Labor Notes, Mark, a few years ago. I know people love to be quoted to themselves. So you wrote an article, though, about labor's next upsurge, and could we be ready for it? You wrote, working class upsurges often happen in the context of deep changes in society as a whole, such as abrupt and widespread economic dislocation, a profound loss of legitimacy by ruling elites, or abnormal political instability. That really struck me reading it today in our current moment, and I wanted to know, are we in an upsurge, do you think? And how are you using this upsurge or not to think about your work in the UE?
Probably should have anticipated this question, but you write one article and then you're the upsurge guy. I think at Labor Notes we had a panel on this, and I think we said that you don't really know you're in the upsurge until a few years later. But I tell you, it kind of feels like something is absolutely happening. There's no question about that. in the working class. There are political changes afoot. We in our union have doubled the size of our union in the last 6 months through thousands and thousands of graduate workers organizing, organizing in their workplaces. And that's due to shifts among young people. That's due to shifts in academic labor that have been, that have been decades in the making. But strikes are up, union petitions are up. Brandon Johnson just won as the mayor of Chicago. There are a lot of things happening. I think it's, though, hard to know, honestly, if we're at that point. And I think, honestly, I'm not sure how much it really matters, because I think we have to do a lot of the same things. I do think that a lot of the ways that we were organizing and doing our work when things were tough, like 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, those of us have been around, for a little while. When you're organizing, when class consciousness is very low, when union activity is very low, that's a very different approach than right now. And I think right now, it's about taking risks. It's about putting things in the hands of workers, putting the process in the hands of workers. We have a tiny staff. There's no way we could organize, thousands of people just, through a staff-driven approach. We had to put the organizing process in the hands of workers. And you're seeing that in successful campaigns across unions, across regions and things like that. So I think there are a lot of things that are happening right now that we can point to that are really interesting, but there's also some pitfalls that we should talk about too, that we really need to think about.
I would love to come back to that. I realize that I've made a huge moderating faux pas, which is that I forgot to have everyone talk about the work that they're doing first, so apologies. But what I will do to wrap this all up is to ask you all to talk a little bit, spend a couple of minutes talking about your organization and your work, and then maybe also address this question if you'd like. What does this sort of maybe upsurge moment feel for you?
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. My name is Keith Bullard, and I am the Deputy Director of the Union of Southern Service Workers in the Southeast. This union comes out of the work of the Fight for 15, of the work that workers have been doing for decades in the Southeast, fighting for higher wages, fighting for benefits on the job like paid time off or health insurance and things. This comes on the work the workers have been doing of fighting for a union. And so that is who USSW is and where it comes from. Now, before I go further, I want to pause to be able to lift up this quote that really speaks to the work that we're doing. And it comes from Reverend Johnson of the Beloved Community Center in Greensboro, North Carolina. And he says that you can tell how a community is doing by the way you treat its workers. You can tell how a community is doing by the way it's treated its workers. So when you mistreat workers, you are abusing their entire community. When you pay workers low wages, you are sentencing entire communities to poverty. And when workers are forced to work in hazardous conditions, you are endangering the health and safety of an entire community. We're all workers, and there's no such thing as a community without workers. Now, to talk about USSW and who we are and what makes up USSW, we are fast food workers, home care workers, retail, grocery store, warehouse workers. We come from all around the service industry in the South. And this is what workers who make up this fight of the USSW. Now, one thing that we're doing, one of our biggest strengths is organizing across sectors. We organize across sectors for a few reasons. One reason is because these jobs are high turnover jobs. there are systems built into place that make it so that workers do not stay at their workplaces long enough to have a conversation with their coworkers to begin to organize for better working conditions. And so these are built-in systems, anti-union busting systems that these corporations in the service industries put in so that workers are not able to organize through a traditional model of it. Workers also are working 2 and 3 jobs. So this is, right now, the time that we're living in, is workers are working 2 and 3 jobs. They're getting off of work from a Wendy's and going to clock in at a facility as a CNA. They're getting off from a Chick-fil-A and going to check in as a housekeeper, you know. These are workers that are getting off from Amazon and then going to check in at a grocery store or at a dollar store. These are the workers that make up USSW and the work that they're doing. Now, with this and the work that they have been doing, back in November, they came together to form a union, which is the union of USSW. And the beautiful thing about it is that when they formed this union, they did not only form a union, they set out a shared list of demands. And in these demands, they are demanding for dignity and equal treatment. Workers are demanding fair pay that they can build their lives on. Workers are demanding fair scheduling because these jobs do not consist of work of teenagers just trying to get a pair of shoes. These are parents, these are working adults that are taking care of families and a lot of times are being penalized for having to take off to take their kids to the doctor. And also in these demands, workers are fighting for a seat at the table. A seat at the table because they are not only the experts on the problems, but they're the experts on the solution. So this is the work that we're doing.
Mark, do you want to
Okay.
expand on UE?
Quickly, then, UE, United Electrical Workers, we started off in the electrical industry many, many years ago, since have branched out to a lot of other industries. So there's been a lot of changes in our membership and things like that. But what hasn't changed is, since our founding in the 1930s, is our commitment to a few basic principles. One is the union should be run by the members. 2 is that the union should be committed to aggressive struggle, militancy to improve working conditions, should be committed to anti-racism, should be committed to internationalism, and should be committed to the political and really ideological independence of the working class. And we've got to think differently than the bosses. And so lately, we've been trying to, work through how to apply those principles to today's environment. When, as we said, things are changing. There's, workers are fighting back in bigger numbers than we've seen in quite a while. And so, for us, like I said, that's been really thinking through how we put the organizing process in the hands of workers who are engaged in the process of organizing. It means letting people kind of run with the process and take some risks. It means that, a lot of people say, we've got to figure out how to win more. I actually think we need to lose more. I actually think we need to try more. We need to fight more. We need to take more risks, which means we're going to lose, more than we have, and that's okay. We're also thinking through how we can move beyond what in union contracts is termed management rights. And so, the labor movement, really ceded control of management of the enterprise to management at, decades and decades ago. And, our union, among others, has always believed that, workers should run society. They should run their own enterprises. They should run the politics, right? And so, very, very difficult to do in a collective bargaining context. But we're trying to do that in many of our contracts right now. We're fighting for something called the Green Locomotive Project, where we're fighting to transition. We build most of the locomotives in North America through our plants to transition those to electric locomotives, and so work directly with communities who are impacted by rail pollution and putting demands on the large railroads to do that. We're also engaged in fighting for the right to strike during the term of a union contract. Another thing that labor, all of us were really forced to give up, and it has been extremely difficult to hold on to, is that right to strike over things like grievances or health and safety. Teamsters have held on to it in some of their contracts. UAW actually has it in the big 3 contracts, but it's, you don't see it very often. And so we're going to be going on strike at one of our large plants in Erie this summer, in part, potentially, unless the employer decides to settle, over the right to strike mid-contract. And so those are some of the things we're working on, and happy to talk more about those.
I'd just like to swim in what Keith and Mark have already offered here. I'm Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants, and our union, I'm very conscious of this fact right now, that our union fought for our autonomy because we wanted to make our own decisions about what was important for us at the bargaining table. It was formed in 1945. We negotiated our first contract in 1946, and we had male-led unions always wanting to tell us, what should be our priorities, how we should do our business, and in fact, we had a very amicable split from the Airline Pilots Association in the 70s because when jet airplanes started to fly, we started to outnumber those pilots in the cockpit, and they didn't like that we were going to outvote them in the union. So I say amicable split because we were looking for our own freedom and self-determination, and they were looking to hang on to theirs too. So for me, it's workers have power. Workers have all of the power. And to Mark's point about, in order to win or lose, you gotta fight, right? And Mother Jones would have told us 100 years ago, you will fight and lose, fight and win, but you must fight. You're not gonna win if you don't fight. And so I cannot help but think, out of all my experience in doing union work and thinking about more recent experiences about how you make the boss really have to assess the risk to them not to settle, right? And sometimes that boss might be POTUS, but you have to make them recognize that they're going to lose something if they don't settle, and that just takes workers waking up to our power. So another Mother Jones quote that I love is, the capitalists say there is no need of labor organizing except the fact that they themselves are always organizing shows you their real beliefs. The capitalists want the most amount of labor for the least amount of money, including, they're fine with slavery and putting children back in the mines. Labor wants the most money for the least amount of work. We should not be afraid to say that. With technology changes and productivity changes, that should go in our pockets as well. There should be a 30-hour work week for full pay and benefits and a retirement and health care. If you would only understand that you hold the solution to the whole problem in your hands. If, for example, every worker in every industry were to simply hold up and stop working, the capitalists would yield to any and all demands because the world could simply not go on. So the corporate elite, they have money and they have control. They do not actually have power. And so the idea that we can wake up to our power and act together and then take control is where we need to go. And that's control in the workplace, control at the bargaining table, control. When we do that, the politics come to us. And so I can't help but connect that back to where I started, which is in the place of women understanding our power and understanding that that the fact that no one has been willing to stand up and say in the halls of Congress that women are full and equal citizens in this country, that we're actually going backwards now, and the fundamental divide, well, the 4 Ds of union busting, I call it divide, delay, distract, and demoralize. The divide started with racism, sexism, ageism, any way to try to divide the working class. And so if we understand that the Dobbs decision is not just about a woman's own freedom and right to stand in her own right, make her own choices in her life, it's really about the bosses trying to lop off half of the population and call them something less than the rest of the working class. And so we have to understand these things, that when there's attacks on individual people because they're different, that we have to lift those people up even more. Because as long as one person can be mistreated, we can all be mistreated. As long as one person can have to tell the boss where they were Saturday night, the boss is going to want to know where we all were Saturday night and why we weren't working. So the work that we're doing in our union is really trying to lift that up, and for the first time, we're in a position where we're actually leading our industry. We're seen as a leader as opposed to sort of dismissed to the side and flight attendants taking it under their own power to decide in our own space what we want to be. No, we're starting to see that actually, because we have been marginalized, because we've been discriminated against, that we've been fighting the entire time. There was no effing labor peace for us ever. And so we've been exercising that muscle for all this time, and we're taking ownership of that, setting the agenda and saying labor issues are not a side issue. They're not a set of side letters. They're not a little clause in a trade agreement. No, we're central to the agenda, and we're going to set the agenda every time. Women join unions, run unions, and any person who has been marginalized, discriminated against, you are the person who should lead your union forward, because you have figured out how to get results when everything is stacked against you. So specifically, we are organizing at Delta Airlines. Most of the organizing in the airline industry with the legacy carriers happened in the 1940s. And Delta kept the union out for everyone but the pilots at that time. They have integrated anti-union narrative into everything that they do at the company. But the other thing that is happening that's really great, Anthony, I can share this, is that the machinists and the Teamsters and the Association of Flight Attendants have formed a pact to organize together 50,000 workers at Delta. And so that's our big fight right now, but it's also recognizing that we have to make sure that this is worker-led. It comes from the rank and file. The rank and file have the power to make the decisions, have the power to make the changes in their lives, and so you have to make sure that everyone is standing on solid ground with that. But ultimately, solidarity is a force that's stronger than gravity. It lifts us up, and when we practice solidarity, there's nothing that we can't accomplish.
So I'm basically going to echo what my fellow panelist here, our panelist here is saying. I'm Antonio Rosario, Teamsters Local 804. I started working as a young package car driver in 1994, and I was part of the strike in 97, where 185,000 workers hit the streets. That's right. I think it's important when you hear about what they're talking about, building that solidarity. For example, and we're talking about building from the bottom up, right? Let's go. I'm also a proud TDU member, for all those that don't know, Teamsters for a Democratic Union. And they've been around since 1976, so you're talking about 47 plus years. It took them almost nearly 2 decades to get our first democratically elected international president, which was Ron Carey, who took us on strike in 97. And it took almost another 2 decades to remove the Hoffa regime, and get Sean O'Brien in there. And that made a big difference in our union. And, you know, we as a people, we know that, and everybody's here kind of been touching on it, but there's a war on the working class people in this country. And there is only one way to win it, and that is by building solidarity. That is by creating an army of organizers. And thankfully, we talk about bringing more people into our union. The Teamsters, over the last year since Sean O'Brien got elected, have brought on over 200,000 workers into the Teamsters. That's a pretty solid number, yeah. We didn't double it like Mark did, but 200,000 is a pretty solid number. You know, and a lot of it had to go with going to these right-to-work states and signing up people who previously weren't signing up. You know, talking to our part-timers. One of the concerns that we had a lot going into this was the division that management, you know, they talk about it here also. They create division, right? Divide and conquer. That is what their MO is. That is what they try to do, whether it be race, whether it be gender, whether it be classification. And in UPS, we have part-timers and full-timers, and there's always been a little bit of wage disparity between them. Carol Tomei, the $27 million lady, we like to call her, she likes, the CEO and UPS like to parade around our UPS drivers because, right, they're the face of the company. They're the people you see. They're making a good wage. They are making a livable wage. They are getting good pensions. But our part-time workers, not so much. Nobody talks about them. I know what that work is like. In '94, it was grueling work, loading package cars, waking up at 3 in the morning, doing 3.5 hours of labor, 4 hours of labor, loading 3 or 4 vehicles, touching over 1,000 pieces. The driver would come in, drive off, and he took all day to unload about 300 or 400. So it's very different, and that wedge has always been there, and they like to create it and make it bigger. But here we are. We're in 2023, and it's not 185,000 workers anymore. If our demands aren't met by July 31st, and they don't get rid of these 2-tier jobs they created in 2018, if they don't make sure that our part-timers get a higher salary, if they don't get rid of outside contracting, if they don't try to make sure they do something about excessive overtime, we will be hitting the pavement with 350,000 workers come August 1st.
Right, that's right.
But you can't just say you're going to go on strike. We've been building up to this, you know, since Sean O'Brien got elected, right? That was the rhetoric when he got elected, which is why many of us voted for him, because the other guy said, I don't know if strike is such a good idea. We were like, I'm going to go with this guy. You know, and it's building it up, right? It's literally, you know, a year out from the strike. Last August, we're already having rallies all across the country. I see a brother from the audience, my brother Val there. He's one of our UPSers in Connecticut. What's up, brother? And, you know, it's people like him and a lot of our workers who are out there having rallies and preparing our members and talking about the issues and surveying our members, asking our members what it is they want out of this possible contract that's coming up. And we hit every building in our local. We have 8,400 workers in our local here at 804 in New York. But there's 350,000 workers. There's barns all over the country. We hit them all up. We asked them what they wanted. We put all of that stuff together. We had a huge compilation of all of what the voices of all the members wanted. And in the end, we came up with, okay, these are the most important things. This is what we got the most. Let's go with it. And after that, right, it's education, education, education. It's preparing your workers for a possible strike. It's going to the building with leaflets about what we're fighting for, things that they mentioned they wanted. It's palm cards. It's placards. It's people with their placards in their cars preparing, fighting for a united contract, wanting to make UPS pay up. UPS deliver on the dream for Martin Luther King Day. That's a catchy one, by the way. And you know, it's very important because we have to make sure our workers know what we're fighting for. And then now you're moving into, here we are, it's like, you know, we're just a few months away, I believe less than 90 days, I think. And we're starting actions again, rallies all across the country. Again, everybody taking pictures, videos, all the UPS workers standing up, letting the company know, hey, we're ready. And we started our contract action team training. This is great because at the CAT trainings, the workers are actually being taught how to strike, how to do it properly, how to do it peacefully, right? Because in 1997, I remember a brick being thrown through a window. I don't know who did it, but I know it wasn't cool. But, so you got to do it peacefully, right? You're going to be walking the picket line, and we're teaching them, and we're actually having strike captains training. We're preparing the workforce. We've been preparing them for 9 months. Save your money. Don't go buying a house. Don't go buying a car. You have to be ready for it. And it's all part of a ground up movement. It's a lot of help from TDU. TDU has had great educational classes and courses preparing workers. The IBT has done a great job of, having this coalition with TDU, the Teamsters United, and it's just been an amazing time. I actually have not felt like this since I was 22 years old. That's how old I was during the 97 strike. I got a picture I'll show you guys later. It's just an interesting time. And when we talk about an upsurge, yeah, there's an upsurge, 100%. Some of us are lucky to see something like this once in a lifetime. I'm lucky enough to see it twice. Some of us, probably will never see one. But there is definitely an upsurge. There's a storm coming. I mean, you got Starbucks workers, Amazon workers. Could you imagine, and this is where I get excited, right? Because UPS workers, we're part of the logistics industry, right? Logistics is we talk about capital, right? You want to talk about putting a chokehold on capital? Logistics is where to go. Now, if you're talking UPS and Amazon, and then DHL, because if anybody didn't know, about 1,100 DHL workers just became Teamsters out in the CVG, which is a huge hub, and we're going to go after the other 1,000 that are in there, too. That was just the ramp. We still got the sorters. But could you imagine? We're talking about a real stranglehold, just UPS alone. That we stop working. That's 6% of the GDP that stops moving in an instant. That's just UPS. If Amazon workers, DHL workers, and UPS workers, and let's throw in the post office and FedEx too, if they were to shut things down or have coordinated actions, do you know how much trouble those folks up there would be? I mean, we talk about solidarity, right? This is what solidarity is about, and it's not just workers. It's working with community activists, community organizations. You have the DSA, you have Align, you have Make the Road. There's a lot of organizations out there that we can join up with that are helping build out these coalitions, make them big, make them strong. Let them know that we're not alone. I know when our UPS workers go out on that picket line, we're not going to be out there by ourselves. I'm pretty sure some of you out here will be out there bringing water to those UPS drivers, right? And it's the same thing, like Sarah says, about, bringing the machinists and the other workers together and building that solidarity with labor unions. Let's break down these walls. Why are these walls up? It's time for us to start reaching out to one another, reaching across the aisle and start working together. Because if we don't start working together, they're going to win. But together, nothing can stop us. Solidarity is one of the strongest things we have. And if we really, really want to make a difference, we really have to start talking about working together and pushing forward together, a united front. That's how I'm going to leave it at that.
Thanks, Antonio. Also, speaking of the strike wave, I noticed we have some Rutgers strikers in the room. Can we get a round of applause for our Rutgers brothers and sisters? To see you guys. Congratulations. How righteous. Writers Guild on strike now, another big one. There is a big, this is going to be a big year. So I'm excited about it. So however we want to talk about this upsurge, I think one thing is clear that we see is that people are not flocking to join unions or be a part of unions that say, okay, great, we're going to pocket your dues money, check your email, we'll take care of this for you. That's not the kind of union that people want to join, right? Like, I'm so inspired that in the Southern Service Workers, your folks are like, we are a union. We don't need anyone to tell us anything else, and they are taking union action. I would love to hear sort of how are your folks, even without sort of the NLRB trappings, how did they see themselves as a union, and how do you think that sort of impacts its democratic potential?
Yeah. Workers see themselves as as a union because they're coming together and they're fighting together. They really broken down the definition of what a union is. They broken down what they took out the language that the employers try to put in there. They say you have to go through the NLRB process and you have to wait for an election and all that. Workers said, well, we are united. We're standing with each other. We have a list of issues, a common list of issues, and so we're not going to sit around and wait for anyone to tell us who we are when we can begin to act like that right now. That was the strength of the Fight for 15. That is the strength of the Fight for 15 when workers began to say, we are a union. That's the strength of USSW. It was an amazing moment when they launched this union, when they came together, workers from all across the service industry, from North Carolina, Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama, came together to be in a room in Columbia, South Carolina, to take a union vote. A union vote. This is outside of the NLRB process. They came together, took off from their jobs to say, we are coming down here to come together to vote on, are we a union? And it was overwhelmingly yes. And for that moment where some workers never thought they would ever be in a union. Some workers at one point may have even bought into the lie of thinking that because of right-to-work laws, unions they may have thought it was illegal or something. But in this moment, workers were in tears. Workers were in tears because they felt that they had support. They knew they have a chant that said, who got your back? We got your back. Yeah. That is what they believe. That is the rallying cry of their union. That is the rallying cry. So when workers at McDonald's are going on strike to speak up against sexual harassment that's going on in the workplace, you have gas station workers that are going on strike to say this isn't right. You have dollar store workers that are going on strike to say this isn't right. You have warehouse workers that are going on strike at a writer's warehouse because of the unsafe working conditions, because they haven't received any training. They don't have any safety training, no PPE, or any equipment that they need to do their job safely. But when they speak out, you have workers at Mod's Pizza that stand up and say, you know what, that is our union, brother and sister, and we got your back. You know, so all across, so workers are not waiting for anybody else to define who they are. They're coming together and say, well, we're united, we stand together, and if you come against them, then you coming against all of us. And so they're taking action. That's where they find their power in the service industry. Because what they want us to do is organize workplace by workplace. This McDonald's job is only these employees are the ones that are going to come together and then vote and things. But like I said before, because of high turnover, that doesn't make that possible. Because of high turnover, it doesn't make it possible. So with USSW, workers have developed, have created a union where they can, if they leave their job at McDonald's, they can take their union with them to that Dollar General. They can take that union with them to that grocery store. This is what's giving them power in the South and in USSW, is by coming together across sector to be able to show power and to say that they are a union.
It's awesome, though, these stories that folks are going on strike. Like you're saying they're organizing across sector, but they are, in fact, picking fights with their bosses. Yes. They are exercising democracy in the workplace. I mean, that is incredible, and that is something that we've struggled as a labor movement in the service industry, the actual fights that happen with your immediate management. So that's amazing. And how does that influence how the bigger union of Southern service workers operates democratically? How do you all think about how you are, structuring your organization and picking fights? How do the members direct that? Yeah.
And so workers are taking this fight, like you said, directly to their employers. This is where they can make change at. This is who is when you get a job, that person that says that you are making $725, that's from your employer. That when they choose not to give you health insurance, that is a decision from the employer. And so workers are saying, in order to change their communities, they are changing their workplaces as well. So they're starting this fight in their workplaces because that is where they can make change at, the most immediate change. And by rallying their community around around the issues that goes on in the workplace, we see one of our members, Mama Cookie, And if you're from the South, you know who Mama Cookie is. This is someone that has worked at several different workplaces in North Carolina. Several different places, from Wendy's to Duke University to CNA to janitor, custodian, all of these different titles that Mama Cookie has, right? And when she has an issue in her workplace, when she was at work at Wendy's and she slipped in the freezer because there's water coming down in the freezer and it's not kept at temperature and things, and she slips and had an injury, not only did the workers come together and rally behind her at her workplaces, but the community came together, rallied around her, and to be able to say that if you do not handle this situation, we will shut this store down. And that's what you constantly hear. That is another rallying cry that workers are having, is that if we don't get it, shut it down. Workers are not afraid to shut down their workplaces. I believe you have said that we have to be bolder in our fight. And this is one of the steps, by declaring that you are a union, by taking these actions directly to your employer. Those bold opportunities that workers are taking on.
Awesome, thank you. I want to continue these questions about democracy. Again, so Labor Notes was founded pretty soon after Teamsters for a Democratic Union. Our tagline is we help put the movement back in the labor movement. And we're feeling pretty excited these days because we were founded on these principles of member-driven unions, no concessions, building strong democratic organizations. And so the rise of democratic movements, of people saying, we don't just want a union, we want a good union. We want a union that is listening to us. We want a union that we run, is, I think, maybe even a more exciting upsurge to the new organizing at times, right? Because we get opportunities like what's happening at UPS. I'd be curious, sort of, what do you see the reverberations of things like the UAW winning one member, one vote recently? No longer electing their top officers through a delegate system. This was a fight for democracy that their caucus won. We've seen all of these caucuses supporting the teacher strikes of the last few years, right? We have seen huge movements in our unions for demanding more democracy. How do you think that has shaped sort of this moment that we're in now? Do you see it in your members? Do you see it in the conversations you have in the broader community? I will open that up to anyone.
I mean, I'll just start by saying, because being a member of Teamsters for a Democratic Union, I didn't see it until about, I would say around 2016. We had our first run against HAFA, and we lost. It was by 6,000 votes. And that's when I realized, and working with TDU, I realized that there's a chance here. That loss wasn't the end of us. That loss was us realizing that we had an opportunity to win, and we can do it with the rank and file. Because that's what we did, right? We went from state to state with workers, rank and file members, and we created a movement. And then 2018 came, we lost, so 2018 came and we saw a contract before us that we knew was no good. And again, we went on a rampage across the country and started a vote no movement, and we won. We voted no, but leadership rammed it down our throat, which was really bad, right? And you would think to yourself, then you'd give up, right? No, you don't give up. You keep fighting, and then you move leadership out of your way with a rank and file movement. That's one thing that when you're talking and educating workers and they're preparing to take something on, and that's one of the, right, they say the bosses are the best organizer because they're the ones that make you see that there's a struggle, that you have to fight. And if you don't fight, like Sarah says, you're not going to win. You have to put up, and you got to put up or shut up. There's no, there's no backing out. And when you're talking to workers and you want to talk about creating that kind of democratic presence in your workplace. It's about those one-on-one conversations. It's about inspiring people. It's about letting them know what their rights are. Little by little, they're going to come and they're going to see that when they fight, they win. And yeah, we're going to lose a few. Absolutely. You're not going to win every battle, but it doesn't mean we lost the war. You know, workers in this country, they're tired of being exploited. They're tired of getting low wages. They're tired of being treated like crap. They're tired of everything. I mean, in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, right? I'm tired of being sick and tired. But this is what it takes. This is why that's why there's this upsurge. That's why people are fighting, because people have been in the struggle. I remember me as a young kid, I was coming out of high school. My father had just passed away. And I knew that mom was going to struggle a bit, but I was a young kid. So here I am trying to go to college, and I realized from that point that, you know, mom is struggling. She's going to lose the house if I don't do something, and I ended up finding a good union job. And back then, as a part-time worker at UPS, you were still making $5 or $6 above minimum wage. And I saw in my struggle that I could get a job that was in the union without college, and I could make enough money to help my mom. Everybody should have that available to them. And everybody should know that there's a struggle out there that's going to make you, you know, if you're backed into a corner, you got to come out and fight, you know, or you're going to lose everything. My mother could have lost the house, a house that my father purchased for like $40,000 in 1979. You know, my mom can sell that house today for close to $800,000, even though that sucks too, but it's not doesn't suck for her. But I was able to help mom do that, and it means a lot to me that I know that we can continue to find these struggles. The struggle is what makes us fight. The struggle is what pushes us further. And what's happening now is why you're seeing this upsurge, because people are tired. People are tired of being exploited, and this is why we are where we are, and that's why this is a perfect time to really push that democratic message. It's a really good time for us to push for all kinds of things. I mean, racial injustices, we got to fight it. Environmental justice, right? We got to make sure that the new jobs that are coming are union jobs. We got to make, because it's going to change, things are going to happen, and we got to jump on top of it before they do. So let's get that, thank you. So let's get that going, all right?
I sort of forgot the original question, but if anyone else has comments.
No, I think it's really important that we recognize that the labor movement is the 94% of people who do not have a union in the private sector, right? And all of the people in the public sector and everywhere else who do not have a union yet. So the labor movement is not whatever 60 or 70 international presidents whose salaries were increased to try to make them on par with management. Like, go try to figure that out. How do you advocate for people when you can't when you can't share the struggle? But it's the movement of working people everywhere. And the laws have tried to define that people don't have rights or don't have the ability to get to an election here or there, the misclassified, all of that. But listen to what Keith said in the demands that were set. Those are the same demands that we're seeing across every single industry, and you've heard it echoed here also. We do not have control over our own time, and that is fundamental. Fundamental, our labor movement was built essentially right along with the fight for the 8-hour day, right? And that was a fight for our own time, for 8 hours of work, 8 hours of rest, and 8 hours for what we will. Like, we are human beings that have the right to have control of our lives. We do not work, we do not live to work, we work to live. And so I think these common demands throughout the labor movement are what bind us together. No two-tiered employment, control of our own time, health care that is not tied to our employment. And climate justice, and let's just call this out, we're not talking about this enough right now. The labor movement in the United States was originally built by immigrants. It was built by immigrants who came together and in a coal field the coal barons specifically hired people from different countries so that they would not be able to communicate with each other. I'll tell you something, those coal operators were not banking on the fact that you were going to have people who spoke different languages but were watching each other comfort their family members when their father was blown up in the mine. And have to deal with that. And that's how the labor movement was formed, was people understand what's in each other's hearts, what's in each other's struggles, in each other's fights, and coming out for each other. And putting everything on the line to fight forward to make sure that that never happens to anyone else again. So all of those fights and bloody battles, you know, we're going to fight smarter, you're right. Striking is peaceful. It's peaceful. Don't let them say anything else. You know, I have this line where I say sometimes you have to beat it out of them. Sometimes they just have to remember the beating that they're going to get if they don't deal with us fairly. In a congressional hearing that came back at me, which always is just hilarious to me, because, you know, why are you such a, like, violent union leader who's advocating for violence? And I'm like, okay, I'm a flight attendant. We advocate for peace, but you know, we have to really take in that anyone who works is a part of this movement. And if we really understand that, then the problems are defined, the demands are defined, the urgency is defined, because we're watching our friends and neighbors die because of these capitalist policies that put workers on the line, and we saw it laid bare during the pandemic. And, you know, they're not just telling us you should feel lucky to have a job. They were telling us, you're worth nothing. We're going to send you in to die because you're just a line item to us. You're not even a human being. And so we have that common bond now, and it's from that we're going to fight. And I'll just note that today, if every single union were actually putting every single dollar that they have, which is not happening, into organizing, it still would not be enough to meet the demand of the working people who want to be a part of the fighting working class. And so stand by for news, but we're going to get an organization together that will pick up that phone every time and make sure that every single worker who wants to form a union has the support to do it.
Thank you. It's so interesting to think about, like, the history of unions as organizations that fought for the whole working class and the instruments that they had to do that too, right? Because we can't actually fight on behalf of the whole working class if we don't have structures to hear what their needs are, right? Like, we have to organize people, otherwise we're just acting on behalf of them. And how do we bring people in? It, you know, reminds me of the, like, awesome work that EWOC, the Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, did during the pandemic. Like, had this hotline people could call, and we saw these independent unions and non, you know, people affiliated with unions as well, to be there to answer that call. Mark, you mentioned earlier that UE has, you know, doubled in size, which is unbelievable, with a modest staff. Can you talk about sort of how? Can you respond to this idea of anyone who wants a union? How do we do this? How do we build this scale with rank and file unionism?
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I mean, I think unions should put a lot more money and resources into organizing. There's no question about that. And but the reality is there isn't enough. Like Sarah said, there isn't enough money. There aren't enough staff. There aren't enough, you know, unions out there to do the organizing that needs to be done on the scale it could be done. And so you got to think about structures to put power and put capacity in people's hands and to be able to, you know, let people kind of do it. And so, and if you look at upsurges, that's kind of what happens. You have new organizations that arise, and then you also have this, like, this ferment in existing organizations, like we're seeing now, right? The UAW and the Teamsters, and just read an article about the UFCW. I mean, you know, you're seeing that's the kind of thing that has to happen. And so the question, I think, for folks like us, I mean, one of the things that's so great about what the Union of Southern Service Workers is doing is just saying to people, you can form a union by coming together, figuring out a structure, getting trained, and acting in solidarity with everyone else in your community, right? You don't have to wait. You don't have to, get to 90% or 60% on cards. You don't have to go through the gauntlet of the NLRB process. We decide when we're a union, not the boss, not the government. We decide that. And so that attitude is one we're going to have to take out more broadly, and that's the idea behind. I mean, it's part of the idea behind EWOC is really, we sort of got sick and tired of people who wanted to get involved in the labor movement, and the only way would be to organize your shop, which is great, which is what people should do, but is also really hard, or become a staff person or something like that, and so, or join an existing union, right? But figuring out other on-ramps for people who want to be in the labor movement is incredibly important. And historically, that's what the left did, right? I mean, and so it's no accident that EWOC is really a left project, right? It's a project of folks who are politically committed, broad-based group of people, right? But politically committed, like those of us in this room are, to building class struggle, to building a fighting labor movement, right? And I think we just need a lot more projects like that. The other thing is we just need, we'll see, but something like the UPS strike and the Big Three auto strike, I remember it back in 1997, what you were talking about, and, I was on that picket line, and it changed my life. I wasn't in UPS. I was working somewhere else, but I went to that picket line, and it changed everything, right? And that strike came from a rank and file insurgency, and we have that potential again with what we're going to see this summer and into the fall. I do think that folks like us have to figure out how to use that potential, right, and how to figure out how we make tools accessible, how we give people tools, how we let people kind of, like I said, kind of run with it, right? I mean, we all want to have super majorities. We all want to have 90%, and that's awesome, and you should have that. I mean, and that's how I was taught. That was drilled in my head, right? You don't move unless you've got everybody in the shop with you. You don't go on strike unless you got 90% ready to go to war, right? And there's a good reason for that, especially when when it's like 1995 and you've come off 20 years of failed strikes, and the other side is kicking our asses, right? That's not right now. Right now, workers have confidence, right? We have confidence. Like, we can make moves right now. We don't have to, if the Flint sit-down strikers waited till they got 90% in the shop, we wouldn't have a modern labor movement, right? So, you just have to kind of remember that the tactics that work for us under some time, place, and condition don't necessarily work today, right? And so we have to kind of figure out how to adapt some things, try some things, experiment a little bit. And like I said, be prepared if we got to lose before we win. That's how it is. Right?
Awesome. Thank you so much. We are at the end of our regularly scheduled section. I know, but we have time for some Q&A. But I did just want to highlight. I just am really feeling the presence of our ancestors, the sort of early labor movement, the civil rights movement. It just is beautiful to have that invoked and to think about that we've been through these big moments before and we're in one now, or maybe we won't know until later if we're in one now. But just what an interesting challenge I'm personally feeling of how to make the most of this moment. So we can open it up. I believe the task is to go find a microphone. This is like union convention style. Robert's rules will not be in effect because I don't know them. I never bothered to learn. Okay, we'll start over here. Please introduce yourself.
Sure. My name is Vina Dubal. I'm a professor of law, and I study on-demand work. And I was wondering, in the sector that I study, you see a lot of the kind of activity that Keith was talking about, sort of extra-legal disregard for law because it's a fissured workplace where people don't have or do not clearly have the same rights as most other workers do. And this fight is sort of coming to a head in the on-demand economy in a very particular moment when the UPS contract is coming up. And I'm wondering if any of you or all of you could sort of comment on what's happening in Massachusetts with regard to the two bills. There's the 32BJ Machinists Bill that asks for a union without employment status, and then the AFL bill that tries to create a path to a union via employment status, and what your leadership is. And we know Sean O'Brien is against the 32BJ bill, but I'm curious as to what people are thinking.
Do we fight for employment status, or do we say, F it, we do what we want? That's very simplifying.
I think the question is, like, are we building a fighting movement, or are we just trying to get people to pay dues? That's the question, and so that should give you the answer to that question too.
Just to
Spicy, I like it.
yeah, just to chime in on that, and you're so right.
That's right. That's right.
But you said something earlier. I mean, we are all workers. We're all workers. And right now, with USSW and the service economy, you have workers that are constantly faced with high turnover. So they may be employed today, and then they may either have a whole nother job tomorrow, or they may be unemployed tomorrow, but they're still a part of USSW. They're still a part of this union, and that is the type of union that we're building. So just like you said, we're trying to build power and get dues.
I would just like to add one thing that we're doing here in New York. It's not like Massachusetts, and I know it's not popular among all the unions, but Teamsters Local 804 supports the Secure Jobs Act. Woo! That's right. That would create, I know if you guys have followed it, it's like a universal just cause for all workers, not just workers in the food industry. And we believe that, just like Sarah said about healthcare, every worker, no matter whether you're in a union or not, you deserve the right to keep your job. They can't fire you for no reason. There's no reason for them to just fire you through an app and say, hey, we don't need you anymore. Like, can somebody tell me why? So yeah, I think universal just cause protections is very important. And one thing I want to add too, don't be afraid to get behind bills that, like we were pushing for the raising the minimum wage here for 21-25, and Kathy Hochul kind of put a little damper on our plans. She felt like $17 an hour is enough by 2026. Well, I think it's needless to say she's going to be a one and done, and then we'll move on from there. But I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Antonio. Please step up.
Hi, my name is Lena. I'm a student at Gutman Community College. This question is geared towards Keith and Mark. What do you guys think about President Biden's climate legislation's effect on energy companies' advances towards building green factories in southern states due to the lessened labor costs? And then how would you guys suggest southern workers respond to that, to not be taken advantage of?
Change the South, change the nation. Isn't that what you'll say?
Exactly. I would pass that off.
So I haven't really followed that really closely, but I mean, look, I think the South, the South exists. The call to organize the South is the historic call of the U.S. labor movement, right? And until we understand that and act on that, we're never going to figure this whole thing out. And so, if capitalists are investing in the South. They have been for many, many years, and it's incredibly important. The organizing is incredibly important, and it's incredibly difficult. But I also think that, legislation in many ways is a reflection of where kind of the struggle is at and where our organizational forces are at and our ability to articulate some independent political position. And so, we shouldn't be surprised when labor doesn't have an independent political voice, that legislation doesn't, carry our interests forward. And we have to fight and scratch and claw at the state level or wherever we can to try to get something passed. And so, that's a question that's going to get called in the U.S. labor movement pretty soon, I think. And so, not knowing the particulars of that, I can't really speak to it, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I agree, not knowing speaking to the particulars on it. But one thing about it that I am really proud and excited about our members is that our members are not just speaking up about issues that may just happen in the workplace. They're not just speaking up about their 8-hour workday. And this is one of the things that workers are asking for. They have real lives, full lives, and they are looking for organizations that represents them as a whole. And so our members are speaking out for climate justice. Our members are speaking out for women's rights. Our members are speaking out for LGBTQIA rights. Our members are engaging in all of these things that represents them, because these things have impacts in their workplaces and in their communities. And so we have to be engaged, and we have to have our members engaged in these issues so that they can speak out, so they can be represented as a whole.
I will note also, Sean Fain, the new president of the UAW, has withheld an endorsement of Biden contingent on support for a just transition and making sure that EV jobs are union jobs, and he spoke to it today as well. So, bold moves. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name's Justine. I'm an Amazon worker. Hi, Sarah. I was wondering, and I don't want to get anyone in the stage on trouble, but how do you see this increase in bottom-up militancy and democracy translating into the AFL-CIO, or translating into forcing more of the higher-ups to lean into militant organizing? Do you see that happening anytime soon, and how can we sort of force it further? Thank you.
So, I mean, I don't think this is about changing the minds of 60 people to act differently. This is really about the fact that the rank and file are going to take over, and when the labor movement has grown, it has grown because young people have taken the helm and taken the lead. And so we're not going to change the generations that came before. Some of the people who fought the good fights are like, finally, now I've got some people to fight with me. So I want to be clear, just because someone has experience doesn't mean that they're stuck in a business unionism model. The very opposite can be true, but that's only going to change when the rank and file really rises up and understands that our unions are our unions. They belong to us. We control it. And if you don't like what's happening, the first thing that you have to know is that challenging your own union and demanding that it be better is the best way that you can love your union, and the best way that you can love the people who are working beside you. But it's not about tearing down that union, it's about taking control from the workers themselves, who are the owners of the union. And so that's how we're going to change things, and I think, either you're going to see that reflected in the AFL-CIO, or maybe we'll see a new formation of workers coming together in a new umbrella. One of the two things is going to happen, but it's going to change if we continue to foster the desires of the working class, who have nowhere else to go but to come together. Because the billionaires are building rockets to fly to Mars and leave us on the burning earth, okay? So this is it. The question is getting called on us. And we're either going to take charge of our future or we're not. And that's just where it's going to be. Don't look for the AFL to lead the way. and I should be clear on that because, you know, I'm just saying, like, in the mind of, like, who the leadership is. I think that's what people mean when they say that. And I'm just going to take it back to the labor movement is the 94% of people who do not yet have their union but want it, and the workers who have to be activated in the unions that already exist.
I think we probably just have time for one more. Is that right? Am I getting the?
No pressure to me, I
I'm
guess.
looking
Okay.
at the. Sorry, I'm looking at my boss here. Yeah, one more. Two more.
Okay, no more pressure. Great. Okay, so hi, I'm Gav. I'm a teacher and aspiring class struggle practitioner. I wanted to kind of jump off that question regarding kind of the struggle of dealing with more business unionist-oriented movements is how do we as workers revitalize our unions? What should we be doing to make sure that unions that already exist that may have calcified a bit can become centers of workplace democracy and of, you know, rank and file workers?
I'm just gonna, you know, I think Sarah pretty much hit it on the head. It's not about Sarah versus Delta. It's not about Tony Rosario versus UPS. It's not about Chris Smalls versus Amazon. It's about the workers versus the corporations. It's about the people versus, or you know, these white-collar crime syndicates, as Sean O'Brien likes to say. At the end of the day, it's about building that worker power. The workers have the power, so when a union member asked me, you know, what's the union doing for me, I said, I don't know, ask Luke. And he's like, what do you mean ask Luke? Where's Luke? I said, Luke in the mirror. That's who's gonna make a difference. So wake up.
I don't think anyone else can pull that off, to be honest. No. I will say, though, this is something Labor Notes has resources for, and also, there's a reason that we have been inundated with requests for people to talk about caucuses, and caucuses as sort of serving as political parties essentially within our unions. TDU is maybe now the most famous example of a caucus in a union, right? But a group that sort of comes together, they form slates, they form a platform, they do their own organizing, they act like the union they want to be to build power and help pressure it from within. Many unions have these. And Labor Notes is happy to help connect people up and support people in those. We run a workshop actually monthly now called What to Do When Your Union Breaks Your Heart. It has hundreds of people sign up for it every month. And I think that tells us something about the hunger for thinking about organizing internally and pushing those organizations to be representative of us. Yes, last question.
Okay. So
Sorry.
the pressure's on me. So, so I wanted to kind of, I guess for me, bring things together a little bit. There's been like a lot of themes in the discussion, really like great contributions from everybody. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Evan, by the way. So y'all have been talking about collaboration. Mark talked about like political independence for workers, and I think for you know, the labor movement, one large issue that it continues to have is kind of aligning politically every time with the Democratic Party. And, you know, doing these big voter turnouts like in Nevada, in Georgia, flipping states. And it shows like the capacity of the working class and the unions to actually have a political, be a political force. So I'm wondering what you all think is the next steps for independence, for working class politics, for Labor Party, to meet the demands like Sarah was talking about with like a 30-hour week for 40 hours pay, because you know the Democrats are not going to be fighting for that. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's really important for us to recognize that there's arbitrary dates on the calendar that are called election days, okay? And so while we're building, while we have our demands set, when it comes to that election day, you got to make the best choice for continuing to climb up the mountain, right? So I have to say that I can't leave this without saying this, that we have Delta flight attendants coming up to us who are saying, I've never been a supporter of the union, but I'm a Democrat, and my president tells me that I should sign a union card, and so I'm going to sign a union card. And I just say that as an example to say that, the environment that we're operating in, essentially when workers have won and made gains, the government has been more supportive during those times of those workers, not outright necessarily fighting them. And when workers have lost has been when the government has sent troops to fire on workers and waged war on the working class. And so it does matter. Elections matter, and I think that we have enough self-selecting organizations in this country. We don't need to divide up the working class more. While we're fighting on the big demands that Keith defined right off the bat, we have to look for those wins. And so in order to organize people in the workplace, you got to find what the issues are right here and now. So as we were fighting in the middle of the United Airlines bankruptcy and they were going to take away our pensions, and we're trying to get people to understand the importance of the pensions so that we can fight for that and take a strike vote and really take it to them, all we kept hearing was flight attendants saying, but they're giving us a hard time about wearing comfortable shoes. And this is our biggest concern. And of course, I wanted to say, they're holding the airplanes together with duct tape, for God's sakes. Put on your comfortable shoes and get out on the picket line for our pensions. But we didn't say that. We put together a petition and ran a campaign so that we could actually wear comfortable, imagine this, flight attendants wearing comfortable shoes. We walk 10 miles a day on these planes. And we won. We got that change in the shoe policy in about 4 weeks. But the conversation that we had tried to have a month before that about taking a strike vote for our pension plans and was going nowhere, after we had that win, we had listened to the workers' issues, we had actually engaged them in that fight and recognized what it was that they wanted to take on, not what we were telling them was important. Then we had that trust built up. And we had the ability to talk with them about the bigger fights and how we were going to come together and win on that too. So, if you're wondering if the workers are behind you, you need to just look ahead because they're probably already ahead of you. And we need to understand that you've got to get those wins. You have to listen to people. You have to help the demands come from the workplace in order to fight on the bigger fights. And when we do that, when we're attacking that, where capital exists, because democracy is not this thing that just sort of exists on its own in its own little, goldfish bowl. No, we're in a system of capitalism, and the capitalists are controlling our politics. So why are we talking about Democrats and Republicans when it's the capitalists that we have to take on?
It's true, democracy is not just a virtue, it is in fact our power. So I think on this democracy panel, thank you so much to our panelists. A reminder that there is a day-long conference tomorrow. It is at the School of Labor and Urban Studies, and about the future of the labor movement. So I hope everyone can make it. Is that right? The future of the labor, yeah, broadly speaking. Sorry, Ruth. Please join us for more terrific conversations, and thanks so much to you all.